What is going on YouTube? This is Jim back with another video review, this time looking at the demo for Bravely Default 2, which was announced earlier this week on the Nintendo Direct Mini, which was really cool, by the way. Unfortunately, I think this demo is not a very good representation of the game, and honestly, I'm glad I got to play it before I bought it, because based on the demo, I would not purchase this game. And I am a huge JRPG fan, and I love pretty much everything Square Enix puts their name to. Unfortunately, Bravely Default just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, considering there are other JRPGs that are currently available right now that do a much better job of selling a story, of selling a world, and most importantly, selling combat. So before I get too much into the nitty gritty, I want to say that I did play the first Bravely Default. I did not beat it. I know a lot of people probably got burnt out on it. I know that I did. That in no way shapes my opinion of the second one. I buy a lot of games that I don't beat, so I'm not going to put that as a knock towards Bravely Default or my lack of enthusiasm for the concept. The concept is this. You are in combat and you have, on top of your regular moves, you have a system called Brave and you have a system called Default. And basically what this does is it allows you to bank moves. So if you decide to default a move, your defense rating goes up, but you do nothing. Instead, you put a point in a basket, and you can borrow and put into these points throughout the duration of a battle, something that's really important because I'll talk about that in a minute. But ultimately, when you're ready to unleash your Brave on your attack, it allows you to cash in those points to do multiple attacks. So, for example, let's say that you defend 3 times in a row. On your turn, you would have your normal attack plus these 3 banked attacks, which allow you to do 4 things at once. Now, there are a lot of combat mechanisms in here that could ultimately be cool, but I feel Bravely Default really falls under its own weight here, and there's a lot of reasons why. Number one, the combat is incredibly over-the-top difficult. This game will force you to grind the demo. And in a game that I don't have any love towards, and I'm just trying it out, the last thing I want to do is get a first look of a game and it be a grindy demo. If you walk straight to the final dungeon in this area, you are gonna get freaking bodied, straight up, no doubt about it. And that's because the game wants you to experiment and play, but it really wants you to grind to get your character levels up so that you're not getting one-shotted by pretty much anything you see. And you'll experience this very early on, depending on what enemy type you come across in the open world. They will pretty much destroy you almost instantly, which is why it's important to have this Bravely Default system. The default part, which does give you that defensive rating, will absolutely be required to save your life. The problem is enemies don't necessarily have a tell as to when they're going to buff their friend or as to when they're going to attack you. And largely what ends up happening is the strategy element of this game turns into a total crapshoot. You're going to just basically hope that on the move when you decide to attack instead of to use your default, you're going to hope that the enemy doesn't hit you then, because if you hit and you're exposed and they hit you, it's pretty much a one-shot right now, which is very broken. Additionally, building up this doesn't really open up a lot of new moves early on. In other words, it doesn't feel like much of a reward. You're basically sitting around getting your face punched in for 3 or 4 moves before you are allowed to retaliate. But even when you stack up your attacks, you're just doing the basic attack 3 or 4 times in a row. So it doesn't really give you much of a benefit other than the fact that on the turns you're not attacking, you're going to get that defensive buff, which you're absolutely going to need. It's very odd to me that they decided to keep this system in play, particularly looking at the success, in my opinion, of the battle system of Octopath Traveler. There, where you saw a timeline of which characters were going to attack when, really allowed you to time your attacks, which did have somewhat of a Bravely Default system to it, which allowed you to break enemies, which would force them to not to be able to attack on a turn. It would allow you to better understand what buffs and what healing things you should do and when. In this game, it's really a hodgepodge as to who's going to go first and who's going to retaliate. There are times that you'll do something and the camera will really just shift randomly to another character who will get a little bit of a bonus. Enemies will sometimes get a bonus based on what you're doing, and that's not always necessarily clear early on. until you really start to understand the mechanics. And honestly, it feels a little unfair at times because here you think you're doing the right thing, bracing for this monstrous attack, and all you're doing is, offhandedly buffing the enemy as well. It just seems like a very broken system. Combat in of itself, outside of that, does seem okay. We're still stuck in this very weird Final Fantasy I era of combat where enemies and heroes just take one step forward and swing their sword into the air and then the enemy gets hurt. I don't understand why, particularly with the emphasis that was put on games like Final Fantasy VII, where you would actually, and I'm not talking about the remake, I'm talking about the original Final Fantasy VII, where your character would jump into enemies and hit them. They would have unique animations for getting hurt instead of just flashing. It really does limit the modeling of this game, and it really feels more like a 3DS Plus game than a true bona fide Nintendo Switch experience. And as a result, I feel like the models just look a little more blocky. They look more Fire Emblem-y from the old 3DS era, and they don't have this nice flesh and heft to them that you would expect in a full-fledged console title. And that's something that I feel is a major, major detractor for this game, because it does look pretty. When you're running around the town or out in the field, you do have a sense of, beauty to the game. You can use your sword to cut away trees, you can open treasure chests, you see enemies wandering on the field. If you can actually walk up behind them, you can get a bonus attack in on them. So it does have this kind of overlay world to it. Even when you're walking around through the town, you can freely walk in and out of certain buildings, talk to townspeople, take on side quests, trade, get different pieces of gear. And it will change the game in the way it looks, but then ultimately that big payoff in combat just really falls flat, at least in my opinion. Now, this game does also support the job system, something I'm a big fan of. That's something we've seen a lot in these JRPGs as of late. Taking a different job will unlock different cosmetics for your character, but more importantly, will unlock different unique traits to them. Sometimes it'll give them a buff to their statistics, sometimes it will just unlock new abilities, and it's cool to experiment and to mix and match depending on combat, and also depending on your particular play style. So you're going to be able to basically build your perfect team of 4 heroes suited to what your play style is. Although I think the game is going to force you to at least have 1 black mage and 1 white mage. That seems pretty standard for these games, and I don't see us getting away from that anytime soon. That's not a fault of Bravely Default 2, that's just the facts of this game. Now, I don't know what the actual story is. The demo makes it very clear early on that this story is independent of the main story and that the progress does not carry over. Although I have read later from other reviewers that say it does take place in the same universe and that it's just advanced farther on from the starting point. Regardless, the story, if this is the real story or not, is your typical 4 crystal story. I don't know how many times we have to go find the crystals of earth and wind and water and fire because evil stole them. I don't understand this. This is not Final Fantasy I. We are 40 years almost past that, and we are still sticking to these dopey crystal quest fetches. And I'm sure there's going to be more to it. Each of the 4 characters that you play as are all nicely independently voice acted. They seem to have some charisma to them. I'm already naturally gravitating to some over the others. They have an option when you're out in the field to do this party chat where your characters will talk amongst themselves based on the recent events of the game, based on where you're at in your progress. That is very welcoming, something that was absolutely missed very poorly, in my opinion, in Octopath Traveler. But ultimately, if the story is about a crystal fetch quest, I just don't understand. You can overlay character drama on top of it, not a problem, but I just don't feel motivated to go get the crystal of water again. And it just seems kind of flat. So overall, I'd have to say that this game is a pass for me. I am not interested in this type of combat. I would much rather play a game like the Final Fantasy VII Remake, where it's a fresh new experience with a nice coat of paint to it. This game, Bravely Default, I think looks great for what it's trying to achieve. It's just the combat system doesn't feel rewarding. It feels incredibly grindy. And most importantly, the story is just something that I can't see investing my time into. Not when there's so many other good games out there now. I really do question as to why Nintendo felt the need to give us a grindy demo, unless they're just trying to prepare us for what the game is. And I understand that JRPGs ultimately do have a sense of grind to them. Bravely Default definitely falls in this category. It's just so odd that in a demo, you're going to be forcing people to do that almost instantly. Instead of saying, hey, we're going to give you just a little drip feed of every part of the world so you can get a rough idea if you like this game. If you want to see this demo through to the end, which I didn't, by the way, I've already installed the game and I'm ready to move on after this video. You're not going to be able to right away. You're going to spend a long time running around up and down, making figure eights in the desert, collecting gold, killing enemies, saving at the end, and fighting until you get a decent enough level. And that just seems very odd to me for a demo. I don't understand. This is a really unforced error by the guys at Square Enix, in my opinion, and they will probably lower the difficulty when the real game comes out. Although I don't think it needs it. I think the Bravely Default, the Brave and Default system are challenging enough on their own to give us normal scaled enemies, but this feels like something you would play on like a nightmare mode or like a torment mode if you were playing Diablo 3. So there's my thoughts on Bravely Default 2 for the Nintendo Switch. The demo is still free to download and free to check out. I highly encourage you to do so because you may think I'm full of crap. And that's okay, because I want to hear from you guys with your questions and your comments down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and until next time, I will see you guys on the other side.